Please, this flight is my only chance. I can't afford the change fee. Rachel Diaz begged the gate agent after saving a collapsing stranger at the airport. She'd given him her last food, a protein bar, and missed her boarding call. The agent shut the door on her face and her dream of escaping poverty. They didn't know why Rachel was really flying to that interview that day. And they had no idea the stranger she saved would change everything within hours. Before watching, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. The fluorescent lights of the San Jose airport terminal hummed with exhausting, relentless frequency. Rachel Diaz checked her watch for the 10th time in less than 60 seconds. Her pulse was racing, beating hard against the collar of her thrift store blazer that smelled faintly of mothballs. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, which contained literally everything she owned in the world. Inside were a borrowed laptop with a cracked screen, a suit for the interview, and one protein bar. That chocolate peanut butter bar was her breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next 24 hours. Rachel had worked nights scrubbing floors at the Beacon Hill shelter to save for this single ticket. She had studied differential calculus by flashlight while others slept in the dormitory beds around her. She had taught herself public policy theory from library books and free online university lectures. Today was the culmination of 4 years of impossible, grinding, relentless effort against every odd imaginable. The Sterling Institute for Public Policy didn't accept people like her, people with no pedigree or connections. But her entrance exam scores had been perfect. Her essay on algorithmic poverty had gone viral online. They'd given her this one interview, the single fragile chance to prove she belonged among the elite. Flight 402 to Boston is now boarding all remaining passengers in Group C, the agent announced. Rachel stood up quickly, clutching her boarding pass like it was a winning lottery ticket. She took 3 steps toward the gate, her stomach growling so violently it actually hurt. She reached into her pocket and touched the wrapper of the protein bar she'd been saving. "Just wait until you land," she told herself firmly. "You can eat on the shuttle." Suddenly, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd of business travelers standing near the departure window. An elderly man in an expensive gray suit slumped over onto the carpet without warning. His skin was pale and clammy, his hand shaking with subtle tremors that looked almost seizure-like. Rachel looked around desperately, expecting someone in their tailored suits to rush forward and help immediately. But the busy travelers just stepped carefully over him, adjusting their briefcases, checking their phones with detached focus. A woman in designer heels actually pulled her rolling suitcase around him like he was an obstacle. "Is he drunk?" A man in a blue silk tie whispered loudly to his colleague standing beside him. "Probably homeless." "Don't get involved, we have the Boston meeting in 3 hours," the colleague replied coldly. They walked away together, their expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor in perfect synchronization. The bystander effect was happening in real time, cold and inhuman, and utterly predictable in its cruelty. Rachel looked at the gate, where the line of passengers was moving steadily through the door. If she stopped now, she would definitely be the last person to board that aircraft. If there was any delay at all, any complication, she would miss the flight entirely. She looked back at the trembling man on the floor. His breathing was shallow and rapid. She recognized the signs immediately from her time living on the streets before the shelter. Hypoglycemia, his blood sugar was crashing dangerously low, and he had minutes before losing consciousness completely. Rachel didn't think anymore. She let pure instinct override her carefully calculated ambition and self-interest. She sprinted out of line, her worn sneakers squeaking on the tile as she dropped beside him. "Sir, can you hear me?" "Sir, stay with me," she urged, checking his pulse at his neck. He groaned weakly, his eyes rolling back into his head, completely unable to form coherent words. His skin felt cold and damp under her fingers, and his pulse was racing dangerously fast. "He needs sugar right now." "Does anyone have candy? A soda?" Rachel shouted to the watching crowd. The businessmen and women just stared at her, silently judging her worn shoes and increasingly desperate tone. A mother actually pulled her small child closer, as if Rachel were some kind of threat. No one moved forward, no one offered a granola bar or even a packet of sugar. Rachel ripped open her pocket with shaking hands and pulled out her only protein bar. It was chocolate and peanut butter, packed with exactly the glucose this man's body desperately needed. It was also the only thing she had to eat for the next 24 hours of travel. She tore open the wrapper with her teat hand, broke off a piece with trembling fingers. "Chew, please, you have to chew this," she urged him softly, placing it gently in his mouth. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the man's jaw began to move, and a hint of color returned to his cheeks. "That's it, stay with me, you're going to be okay," Rachel whispered, holding his cold hand. Time seemed to blur and stretch as she focused entirely on his recovery, blocking out everything else. Someone finally called 911, and paramedics arrived approximately 10 minutes later, pushing through the crowd with equipment. "We got him, miss. Excellent work getting sugar into him quickly," the lead medic said, taking over. Rachel stood up on shaking legs, her knees weak from the adrenaline dump coursing through her. She turned desperately toward the gate, her heart plummeting sickeningly into her stomach like a stone. The door to the jet bridge was closed and locked, the agent typing on her computer. "Wait! Please wait! I'm here! I'm on that flight!" Rachel cried out, running toward the desk. "I'm sorry, miss. The door is closed and the aircraft is pushing back," the agent said flatly. "But I was right here! I was helping that man who collapsed," Rachel pleaded desperately. "The flight is closed. The next available C-80's tomorrow morning at 6, the agent replied. "I don't have money for a hotel or a change fee," Rachel whispered, tears forming instantly. "Then I can't help you." "Next in line, please," the agent said, looking past her completely. Rachel walked slowly to the window and watched the plane push back from the gate below. Her interview at the prestigious Sterling Institute was scheduled to begin in exactly 4 hours. She had missed the flight, the interview, and her only chance to escape poverty forever. She sat down heavily on the cold terminal floor, the empty protein bar wrapper still in her hand. She had spent her last dollar and her last meal saving a complete stranger who wouldn't remember her. The wrapper crinkled in her grip, and finally the tears came hot and stinging and unstoppable. 4 years of night shifts, of studying by flashlight, of sacrificing everything, gone in 15 minutes. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, desperately searching for any possible solution to salvage this. She found the Sterling Institute admissions office number and dialed with trembling fingers, praying for mercy. "Sterling Institute. How may I direct your call?" A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. "This is Rachel Diaz. I had an interview scheduled for today at 2, Rachel said quickly. "There was a medical emergency at the airport, and I missed my flight. Is there any way?" "Hold, please," the voice interrupted, and classical music filled Rachel's ear for 3 agonizing minutes. "Ms. Diaz, the admissions committee has agreed to conduct your interview via video conference," the voice returned. "You'll need to be online in exactly 2 hours. Check your email for the link." The line went dead before Rachel could even thank them or ask any clarifying questions. Rachel found a quiet corner of the terminal and set up her borrowed laptop on a table. She used the last of her phone's battery to create a hotspot for internet access. She angled the camera carefully to hide the airport seating and departure boards visible behind her. She practiced her smile, wiped her eyes, and tried to look like someone who had their life together. 2 hours later, at exactly the scheduled time, she clicked the video conference link with shaking hands. The screen loaded slowly, then revealed Professor Edmund Harrington sitting in his leather chair at Sterling. He was surrounded by floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, filled with impressive leather-bound volumes and awards. He looked like a statue carved from marble, severe and unyielding and utterly without warmth or mercy. "Ms. Diaz," Harrington began, his voice dry and cold as winter wind across frozen ground. "I see from the notification that you missed your flight. A rather disorganized beginning, wouldn't you say?" "There was a medical emergency, Professor," Rachel explained, keeping her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "An elderly gentleman collapsed in the terminal. No one else was helping him, and he was in real danger." "And you are a licensed medical professional with legal authority to intervene?" Harrington asked, one eyebrow raised. "No, sir. I just recognized the signs of hypoglycemia and knew he needed immediate assistance." "So you sacrificed what you yourself described as your only chance," For a complete stranger. He could have passed away if someone hadn't intervened immediately, Professor, Rachel defended quietly. Harrington sighed deeply, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose in apparent disappointment. Ms. Diaz, the Sterling Institute trains global policy leaders and architects of civilization, not field nurses. Leadership at the macro level, is fundamentally about resource allocation and strategic risk management. You allocated your most valuable asset, your irreplaceable time, to what economists would classify as a zero-return investment. Rachel felt a cold knot of dread tightening painfully in the center of her chest. Sir, with all due respect, saving a human life isn't a zero-return investment by any measure. In the world of policy and macroeconomics, it is merely a variable, Harrington countered sharply. You had a clearly defined goal, with measurable high-value outcomes. You allowed an emotional variable to derail it. That indicates a fundamental lack of focus. It suggests you are easily distracted by sentiment rather than strategy. I wasn't distracted by sentiment. I responded to an emergency with basic human decency, Rachel argued. You responded with charity, Harrington corrected, saying the word like it tasted rotten in his mouth. The Sterling Institute produces leaders who make difficult, often painful choices for the greater societal good. If you cannot prioritize your own strategic success, you certainly cannot be trusted with a nation's resources. Your charitable impulse, while perhaps admirable in the abstract, indicates a fundamental misunderstanding of scale and systems. Rachel's frustration was rising now, breaking through her carefully maintained professional composure despite her exhaustion. Professor, I encountered a problem directly in front of me, and I solved it with the resources available. And in doing so, you created a catastrophic new problem for yourself, he pointed out coldly. This program requires ruthless efficiency, Ms. Diaz. You demonstrated emotional weakness instead. Empathy is a luxury afforded only by those who've already secured their position. You clearly haven't. Now, let's discuss your entrance materials, Harrington continued, shuffling papers on his elegant desk. Your examination scores are adequate. Your essay was emotionally compelling but theoretically shallow. Professor, please, if you look at my self-designed curriculum and my research on algorithmic poverty, Rachel began. I have reviewed your materials thoroughly, Harrington interrupted, his tone indicating finality. Your academic foundation is unorthodox. Your judgment, as demonstrated today, is fundamentally flawed. You lack the necessary focus and strategic thinking required for leadership at the policy level. I am therefore rejecting your application to Sterling Institute, effective immediately. Professor Harrington, please reconsider. I've worked 4 years for this single opportunity, Rachel pleaded desperately. And you traded that opportunity for a stranger's comfort. That is failed logic, Ms. Diaz. I am terminating this interview. Good luck with your future rescue missions. The screen went abruptly black. The connection terminated without ceremony or even basic courtesy. Rachel stared at her own reflection in the dark screen of her laptop, seeing a failure. She was stranded in an airport terminal, hungry, exhausted, rejected, and completely without hope. She had done what she believed was the right thing, and it had cost her absolutely everything. Tears spilled over, hot and stinging against her cold cheeks, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. Excuse me, miss. A deep, professional voice interrupted from directly behind her suddenly. Rachel wiped her eyes quickly with her sleeve and turned around, embarrassed to be seen crying. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stood there, but it wasn't the man she'd saved. It was a younger man in his 30s, holding a tablet and looking genuinely urgent. Are you Rachel Diaz? The man asked, his tone respectful rather than dismissive like the gate agent. Yes. Look, I'm leaving in a minute. I just need to collect myself, she stammered. My employer would like to speak with you immediately. He's in the first-class lounge. He says it's extremely urgent and won't take no for an answer, the assistant added. I don't know your employer, and I really can't deal with anything else today, Rachel said tiredly. You fed him a chocolate peanut butter protein bar about 3 hours ago, the assistant smiled knowingly. Rachel froze completely, her mind suddenly racing to catch up with this unexpected information. He's awake? He's okay? She asked, relief flooding through her despite everything else. He's awake, he's recovering, and he's absolutely furious about what just happened to you. Rachel followed the assistant through the terminal to the exclusive first-class lounge she'd never entered before. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from the chaotic terminal. Quiet, elegant, with plush furniture and soft lighting. Sitting on a cream-colored sofa, sipping orange juice slowly, was the elderly man she had saved. He looked frail but alert now, his color restored, his eyes sharp and calculating as they fixed on her. "You must be the young woman who gave me the peanut butter bar," he said, his voice raspy. "It was chocolate peanut butter, actually," Rachel corrected automatically, then felt embarrassed for being pedantic. "I'm Cyrus Vance," he said, extending a still slightly shaking hand toward her with unexpected formality. Rachel gasped audibly, and several heads turned toward them in the quiet lounge at her reaction. Everyone in tech, everyone in business, everyone in America knew that name like they knew their own. Cyrus Vance was the founder and chairman of Vance Logic, the artificial intelligence giant of Silicon Valley. His estimated net worth was somewhere north of $12 billion, according to the latest Forbes list. I had absolutely no idea who you were," Rachel whispered, shaking his hand carefully. "I heard from my security team that you missed your flight because of me," Cyrus said seriously. "I did, and I just failed the most important interview of my life because of it," she admitted. "Because of helping me?" Cyrus asked, his expression darkening with visible anger on her behalf. "The professor said helping you was failed logic, and that I lacked focus," Rachel explained quietly. "He said I didn't have the ruthlessness necessary to be a leader in public policy." Cyrus slammed his glass down on the marble table, hard enough to startle the lounge staff nearby. "Ruthlessness?" Cyrus growled, his voice filling with intensity that made him seem suddenly much less frail. "I built a $12 billion empire on algorithms and machine learning, young lady. But do you know what the smartest, most efficient code in the entire world actually is?" Rachel shook her head slowly, completely mesmerized by the sudden intensity radiating from this elderly man. "Compassion," Cyrus declared firmly, tapping the table for emphasis with each word. "It is the only variable that actually matters in the long run, the only thing that builds lasting value. If that pompous professor can't see that fundamental truth, then he's the one who failed, not you." Cyrus leaned forward, looking directly at Rachel's worn sneakers and thrift store blazer with clear understanding. "Where do you currently live, Rachel?" he asked gently, his tone shifting to something almost paternal. "Currently?" "The Beacon Hill shelter on 3rd Street, she answered honestly, seeing no point in lying. "I work as their night janitor in exchange for a bed and study time after my shift ends." Cyrus looked at her with a powerful mixture of shock and what appeared to be profound respect. "You gave me your last meal," he realized aloud, his voice heavy with the weight of that sacrifice. "You had nothing at all, and you gave Emmy everything you had without hesitation or calculation. That isn't poor logic or failed thinking. That is the highest possible form of human intelligence." He pulled a heavy fountain pen from his jacket pocket and grabbed a cloth napkin from the table. He scribbled something quickly on the napkin and signed it with a flourish, then slid it toward her. "I don't have a scholarship to offer you, Rachel," Cyrus said, watching her face carefully. Rachel's heart sank slightly, though she'd expected nothing more than perhaps a thank you check for lunch. "I have something better. I have a job offer," he continued, his eyes twinkling now. "Director of Social Impact Strategy at Vance Logic. Starting immediately, if you'll accept." Rachel stared at him in complete disbelief, certain she'd misheard or misunderstood somehow. "I don't have a degree yet, Mr. Vance. I haven't even finished my undergraduate coursework. I don't care about a piece of paper from a pompous institution that values cruelty over compassion. I need someone who understands problems from the ground level, someone who's lived what we're trying to solve. My engineers build beautiful towers of code, but they don't know what happens in the basement. I'm offering you a starting salary of $200,000 annually, plus full benefits. And stock options that vest over 4 years. You can start today if you want." Rachel felt the entire room spin around her, the elegant lounge suddenly seeming dreamlike and impossible. "Are you completely serious right now?" she managed to whisper, her voice audible. I have never been more serious about anything in my entire 73 years on this planet. Do we have a deal, Rachel Diaz? Cyrus asked, extending his hand again. Rachel looked at the napkin with the number written on it, then at this man who saw her true value. Yes, we absolutely have a deal, she said, her voice stronger now, shaking his hand firmly. The handshake felt like a contract, like a promise, like the beginning of something impossibly important. The next 11 months became a whirlwind of transformation that Rachel could process even as it happened. She traded her janitor's mop and bucket for a top-of-the-line MacBook Pro and unlimited research budget. She traded her shelter bed and donate uniform for a modern apartment and tailored professional clothing. But critically, essentially, fundamentally, she never traded her perspective or forgot where she came from. She refused Cyrus's initial offer to work from the gleaming glass tower in Silicon Valley's most prestigious area. Instead, she set up her primary office in a renovated warehouse 3 blocks from the Beacon Hill shelter. She brought in Vance Logic's engineers and made them walk the streets with her daily. You cannot code an effective solution for hunger if you've never actually been hungry yourself, she told them. You cannot build housing algorithms if you've never slept in a doorway in January rain. She developed HopeLink, a dynamic artificial intelligence resource allocation system, unlike anything that existed. It used machine learning to match perishable restaurant food with shelter meal programs in real time, preventing waste. It matched vacant commercial spaces with temporary housing needs, creating safe shelter from unused square footage. It created digital identity systems for unhoused people so they could access banking, employment, and services. The system was ruthlessly efficient in its logic, yet deeply compassionate in its fundamental design philosophy. Within 6 months of launch, homelessness in San Jose had measurably dropped by 41%. The HopeLink model was rapidly adopted by 3 other major California cities, with similar, remarkable results. Rachel Diaz wasn't just a success story. She had become a genuine phenomenon in tech and policy circles. She appeared on the cover of Tech and Society magazine, photographed in front of the shelter she'd lived in. The headline read, "The Empathy Algorithm: How Rachel Diaz Fixed What Government and Silicon Valley Couldn't." She was invited to speak at the United Nations General Assembly and gave testimony to Congress. The White House announced a pilot program based directly on the HopeLink framework and methodology, and inevitably, predictably, her success attracted the attention of the academic establishment that had rejected her. One morning in late summer, her assistant buzzed the intercom in her warehouse office with unusual hesitation. "Ms. Diaz, we have a VIP visitor in the lobby who insists on seeing you personally. He says he's from the Sterling Institute for Public Policy, a Professor Edmund Harrington." Rachel D. mid-keystroke, her hand shoving over her keyboard as old emotions suddenly flooded back. She looked down at the silver pin on her lapel that Cyrus had given her 6 months ago. It was shaped like a small protein bar wrapper, crafted by a jewelry designer, a reminder of where she started. "Send him up to my office," Rachel said calmly, a small knowing smile playing at her lips. She stood up smoothly and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the street where she used to sleep. She wasn't the scared, desperate girl sitting on that airport floor anymore, not even remotely. She was the woman who had rewritten the code and proven that compassion was the most efficient algorithm. Professor Edmund Harrington walked into her modern office looking somehow smaller than she remembered from the screen. On video, he had seemed like a giant. In person, he was just an aging man in an outdated tweed suit. He looked around the bustling, diverse office with visibly uncomfortable eyes, clearly out of his element here. "Ms. Diaz," he said, extending a hand with a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes at all. "It is quite remarkable to see what you have built here in such a remarkably short time." Rachel didn't shake his hand. Instead, she gestured coolly to the chair opposite her executive desk. "Please sit down, Professor Harrington. Tell what do I owe this unexpected honor?" Harrington sat carefully, adjusting his tea nervously, clearly not accustomed to being the supplicant in conversations. "Well, as you may know, Sterling I launching a new Center for Civic Technology and Policy Innovation. We have been following your HopeLink data quite closely. The statistical outcomes are genuinely impressive. We would like to offer you an honorary faculty fellowship at Sterling with all attendant privileges. And, of course, a formal research partnership We want to study your methodologies in depth. We believe a collaboration between Sterling's theoretical framework and your practical application would be mutually beneficial. Rachel leaned back in her leather chair, steepling her fingers, studying him with the same analytical gaze he'd used. "Let me analyze this proposal using your own framework, Professor," she began, her tone perfectly neutral. "You want to attach Sterling's prestigious brand to my demonstrable results and measurable social impact. You want unrestricted access to my proprietary data, my team's insights, and my public reputation." "Yes. Well, Sterling would, of course, provide significant institutional prestige and academic credibility," Harrington started. "Prestige is a variable I've learned to eliminate for maximum efficiency," Rachel interrupted smoothly. She used his exact cadence, his precise tone, from that devastating day in the airport terminal. Harrington froze completely mid-sentence, visibly recognizing his own cruel words coming back at him. "I remember our last conversation with perfect clarity, Professor," Rachel continued calmly. "You told me that empathy was a weakness, that compassion was a liability in leadership. You told me that saving a human life was failed logic and demonstrated poor judgment. I was merely testing your reasoning under pressure," Harrington lied, sweat appearing on his forehead. "No, Professor, you weren't testing me. You were judging me," Rachel corrected him firmly. "You judged me because I was poor, because I came from a shelter, because I showed basic human decency. My system works precisely because it is built on the very foundation you rejected and mocked. It succeeds because we prioritize the human being, not the statistic or the theoretical model." She stood up smoothly, signaling that this meeting was approaching its conclusion, whether he liked it or not. "Your institution trains people to manage the world from ivory towers, from positions of isolated comfort. My team builds practical ladders for actual people to climb up from real poverty. Our operating systems are fundamentally incompatible, Professor. Our core values don't align." Harrington stood up abruptly, his face flushing an unhealthy shade of red with embarrassment and anger. "You are actually refusing a partnership with the Sterling Institute?" he asked, his voice rising with incredulity. "I am rejecting your application," Rachel said firmly, using his exact words from 11 months ago. "You lack the necessary components to lead in this new world we're building here. You demonstrated failed logic by prioritizing theory over humanity, prestige over actual measurable impact. Good luck with your theories, Professor Harrington." Harrington opened his mouth to argue, to assert his authority, but then slowly closed it again. There was absolutely nothing left to say. The power dynamic had completely, utterly, irreversibly flipped. He turned stiffly and walked out of Hair Office, defeated by the very student he had so callously discarded. As the main door closed behind him with a soft click, the side door opened immediately. Cyrus Vance walked in slowly, leaning on his elegant cane, his face split by an enormous grin. "That was absolutely brutal, Rachel," Cyrus laughed, his eyes twinkling with delight. "I watched the whole thing from the conference room. Perfectly executed revenge. Was it too emotional? Did I let sentiment override strategy?" Rachel asked with a slight smile. "It was perfectly calculated," Cyrus replied, walking over to stand beside her at the window. Together, they looked down at the street below, watching the city they were systematically healing. A white Hopling van was pulling up to the community center across the street right on schedule. People were lining up, getting food, getting temporary housing assistance, getting hope and dignity restored. "You were absolutely right from the beginning, Cyrus," Rachel said softly, watching the people below. "Compassion isn't soft logic or emotional weakness. It's the most efficient code ever written." "And the best part?" Cyrus asked, tapping the window glass gently with one weathered finger. "It's completely open source. Anyone can use it, modify it, improve it, if they have the heart." Rachel touched the silver protein bar pin on her lapel, remembering that moment in the terminal. The moment when she'd had nothing and given everything. When she'd chosen humanity over ambition. That choice had cost her everything she thought she wanted, but given her everything she actually needed. "That professor will never understand," Rachel said quietly, watching the van distribute supplies below. They'll never understand that the strongest algorithm isn't ruthlessness or efficiency or cold strategic calculation. The strongest algorithm, Cyrus agreed, putting a gentle hand on her shoulder, is caring about people. They stood together in comfortable silence, mentor and student, watching their code change the world below. Do you think universities and corporations value cold logic too much over empathy today? Or was Professor Harrington right that leadership requires ruthless efficiency over emotional decisions? Have you ever been told you were too emotional when you were actually being human? Share your thoughts in the comments below so we can learn from each other. If you believe that kindness is strength and compassion is intelligence, please like and subscribe. We bring you stories where humanity wins, where the good people triumph over cruelty. See you in the next story.